Good evening there to each one of you. I hope that you are well and taking as good care of yourselves, doing self care in the midst of busy lives. And you're always in my thoughts, especially as I prepare for the next didactic. Um, Tonight is going to be probably a shortened one because it is the next topic in this book that we are going through. And it is called Emotional Disorders, a Unified Transdiagnostic Protocol. And a protocol is a method of the way to do something. And in psychotherapy, it is a way to treat according to scientific evidence and research and outcome. And so tonight, we're going to understand maybe a little bit more the underlying similarities behind some of the emotional disorders that we have been uh, talking about. So, um, this recent protocol is been developed and being used right now in the Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders at Boston University here in the States in Boston, Massachusetts. In this unified trans diagnostic protocol, therapeutic principles common to psychological treatment of emotional disorders have been distilled and integrated into one single protocol that is applicable to the full range of emotional disorders. So it's very unique. It Psychology and psychotherapy counseling is a behavioral science. So, as a science, there has to be a lot of evidence and proof that it is workable. The outcomes for treatment are there. And so it is studied quite a bit when they come up with something new in the field of psychology or psychotherapy. Um, let's see. What is new about this approach is the systemic manner in which the treatment components are applied across all of the disorders. So, therefore, the word transdiagnostic, um, and as well as theoretical developments leading to the conceptualization of the target of treatment. So that is a mouthful. That is deep, and even for me. Um, so basically, I had mentioned, and I believe the last session, that the DSM, which is a manual, diagnostic manual for mental disorders, um, that is what psychotherapists use. And instead of going to a specific DSM defining system for treatment protocol, this is a systemic transdiagnostic. So it's all unified into one protocol. And I just am going to summarize and highlight briefly some of the components of this type of protocol. First of all, let me just clarify that emotional disorders in what we're talking about for this protocol are include not only the anxiety, depressive, obsessive compulsive, and trauma related disorders, but also other classes of disorders in which the experience and regulation of emotions um, play a prominent role. So things like you've heard of psychosomatic, so somatic disorders, which are physical manifestations that are associated with emotional dysfunction or emotional dysregulation. And so those might include eating disorders, um, uh, physical disorders, borderline personality disorder can also be conceptualized as a disorder of extreme emotional dysregulation. Um, and so, with the advancement of science and practice, they keep coming up with ways to improve treatment to help heal people and also put patterns together, common symptoms, common patterns of behavior. And in this, it is combining a lot of the emotional, generally speaking, emotional disorders to help process emotions and change through cognitive behavioral therapy the emotional response. And that takes a lot of practice and really, truly takes a lot of experience on the part of the psychotherapist or counseling. And I know that for your purposes in your role as chaplains or counselors, that you just basically need to know that there are a lot of similarities running through these emotional disorders or dysregulation in our emotional response and reaction to life events and relationships and personal well-being with our mental and emotional selves. So I wanted to just briefly talk also about the etiology, the origin of where some of these emotional disorders come from. They have now come up with a term called triple vulnerability. And there is the theory that it includes a generalized biological vulnerability, which has to do with genetics, that there is something the way a person is wired, that there's some genetics that might contribute, and then a generalized psychological vulnerability, and then more specific psychological vulnerability, which the specific psychological vulnerability actually emerges from some earlier learning event or experiences even as a child. So earlier in life, something that a person experiences that contributes to these specific anxiety, depressive disorders, other types of phobias. So, they also are much of the research on generalized biological and psychological vulnerabilities has focused on a temperament labeled or those temperaments, personalities that seem to have a negative affect or behavioral inhibition, or what they classify as trait anxiety, some traits and some personalities that automatically lean toward anxiety. Um, I don't know there in your culture, but here, the term neuroticism, neuroticism, uh, sometimes people will even humorously say to someone else, "Oh, you can be neurotic about that." And generally, in our society here, in our culture in the States, people know what that means. It might be meaning that you are extremely obsessive compulsive, So when you either seriously or humorously say someone, you might be neurotic about that. That's what they mean, that it's like a neurosis or a disorder that is just a little off balance. So, anyway, that's some of the etiology, and it's amazing to me how much early life experiences can foster this sense that events are, especially negative events that happen in a person's life, that they are automatically unpredictable all the time and uncontrollable. So then that, of course, uh, gives way to high anxiety, phobias, fear, the cycle that can just go down, spiraling. And so it says a lot about mental health, how important it is to give our children at whatever age a good beginning to personal development, social development, and family development, and learning their education. And I know that some events are going to automatically be traumatic, such as natural disasters. And we just see them here in the States. We have a lot of flooding. I know you do there, but it's just been a lot. Uh, and earthquakes and hurricanes, typhoons lately. We're in that season. So, those natural events where a family or a person is directly impacted, those are just going to happen and be part of life. But a lot of experiences we can learn to cope, we can learn to um, be empowered to be able to cope, to change what we need to change, if that's our thinking, or because our thoughts directly in fact impact our feelings, affect our feelings, our emotions. And therefore, out of those emotions, and I've said this before, becomes our behavior. And some of it we consciously think about, a person can consciously think about, and sometimes subconsciously it just happens. So that's why cognitive behavioral therapy, whether you're working with someone in a professional, clinical way, or even just through church or work, or any role that you have as a counselor, whether that be official or unofficial, we can always think and remember these things when we're talking with people. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and just summarize um, it, what I'm trying to say. So, I talked about a unified transdiagnostic protocol, a method for treatment for emotional disorders, is a treatment approach that aims to address the underlying factors that contribute to a whole range of emotional disorders, rather than focusing on one specific diagnosis. So it's a way to see all of them across a spectrum. And that includes the origin, the person's life events, um, the person's health, physical health. So you take into account a whole range of emotional uh, events and things that have led to the disorder. This approach is based on the idea that emotional disorders share common features such as dysfunctional thinking or thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. It includes a number of components of treatment, such as the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps people to identify and challenge their negative thoughts, negative beliefs, and to develop more helpful ways of thinking. So that is just everything we I have talked about in the didactics have to do with, many of them have to do with our negative thinking and anxiety that comes from that, or beliefs. And then another protocol in this protocol is mindfulness based interventions. So, teaching people to focus on the present moment, and the big the big factor here is to help them accept their thinking and their feelings without making a judgment on themselves. So, mindfulness based interventions, emotion regulation skills training. So, training, this is the kind of training and techniques that teaches people how to manage their emotions. And so, if their emotions begin to get out of control, there are certain skills and techniques that help a person to reframe their thinking, feeling, to reframe it, see it from a different angle, different perspective, and to have some inner self control over those emotions. And then the last one is interpersonal therapy. That helps people to improve their relationships and to cope with difficult life events. And relationships are made up of expectations in the relationship, boundaries, personal, professional, spiritual boundaries. Um, just mutual communication, conflict resolution. So, all of those are interpersonal, and that is certainly part of helping treat emotional disorders. And I would say, spiritually, biblically, giving people verses, God's promises, or the Apostle Paul's exhortations about our mind and our heart and our behavior, and helping people, if they're Christian or even if they're not Christian, to teach them some of those important truths that can also help them have more balance and regulation. Let's see. Some of the benefits of using a unified trans diagnostic protocol is it can be more effective than treating each disorder separately. And basically, all of the things we've covered, like social phobias and um, panic attacks and different anxieties, general anxiety, social anxiety, just all of the ones that we've dealt with. We've talked about some of the drug treatment, medicine, and also the type of therapy, counseling that needs, and it's all pretty similar in what we've covered, but to not see it as one specific, but how they all are similar and tie together. So it can be more effective, it can be more efficient, as it doesn't require as many sessions as when you're digging into one specific disorder. Also, this type of unified approach can be more flexible because it can be adapted more easily to an individual. A lot of times here in the States, psychotherapists and counselors will just use that one protocol for that specific disorder, and they'll usually go with that. Although I think most therapists and counselors should be sensitive to the uniqueness of each person. Um, it can be more accessible. This kind of a unified approach can be delivered in a variety of settings, um, and even group settings, individual or group. Let's see here. One thing that came to my mind when I was reading through this information and assimilating it, I wondered, because it's been 15 years since we've lived in the Philippines, I cannot really remember, do Filipinos, are they aware of their emotions, identifying their emotions at any given moment? Um, and that would be maybe something that you can help me with when you do your reflection on emotional disorders. And you have been very good on your reflections, and I actually enjoy reading them. So thank you. Let's see if I've covered everything, the features, the concepts of this approach. Um, let's see. Of course, therapists using this approach typically start with a comprehensive assessment to understand the client's specific emotional disorder and underlying factors, such as family dynamics, trauma, abuse, um, ways of thinking that are not realistic. All of these different types of um, underlying factors. So it's important to start with that. The assessment helps inform the development of a personalized treatment plan. And I will go back in my notes and see if we have given a specific type of treatment plan an example of that. Um, the long-term benefits of a unified approach are to reduce symptoms of emotional disorder, but also to equip clients with skills and strategies to prevent relapse and maintain emotional well being in the long term. I mentioned that this unified plan can be done in group or individual therapy, and that depends a lot too on the individual, if they would rather stay private, individual versus a group. You would have to, if you're not in a licensed professional therapy situation where you're the therapist, um, then even things like this can be done in, if you had a small group, say at church, and they wanted to, talk about and learn about and process things like this. Let's see. I think I've covered most of the information that I wanted to share. So this is just kind of without getting deeper into it, we could do a personal case study that would take up probably another 30 minutes. And if Chaplain Nato or you that are CPE students would like that, we can, or we can go ahead next didactic, next month, and talk about our next chapter, which is on depression. So, Chaplain Nato, if you would guide me in that. Yeah, the next chapter is cognitive therapy for depression. Isn't it interesting how our mind, our brain, can really not only physiologically be imbalanced in all of the chemistry and the electrical current that's going through our brain, but how our minds, our brains can really affect our whole person so much. And so this cognitive therapy for depression will be interesting. All right, that's all for tonight, and God bless you and keep you. Amen. Bye bye.